Hi there. I'm A. David Lewis, and it's my pleasure to be speaking tonight with my artistic collaborator, Justin Rentería. Justin and I had the pleasure of working together on the 2023 release from Graphic Mundi of Kahlil Gibran's The Prophet, a graphic novel adaptation. And what I thought we would do tonight is bring in some of the questions from my students, at MCPHS University. We are reading through this in two of my classes as we look at uh, the impact on poetry when it's adapted to another medium. Now, of course, that's not only comics. We're looking at videos and music and so forth. But the opportunity we have here is we have, with Justin, a major creative driver and innovator in adapting this. So I thought it'd be nice to catch up and field some of my students' questions. Justin, thank you for being here
Yeah,
tonight.
of course. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh yeah, it's lovely to talk with you again, my friend. So these questions are coming from my students. They were just recently introduced both to the Prophet and to our adaptation of it, but they came up with some pretty reasonable inquiries. Here's the first one from Angela. Angela asks, when did you first read The Prophet? And how long since then did you begin the project? So I think they're asking when were you first exposed to The Prophet? And then how much time passed before you and I uh, decided to tackle it for Graphic Mundi?
Okay, right. Well, my it's actually a funny story. My art teacher in high school, and I believe I told you this story, Dave, and probably Kendra at ALA conference. But my art teacher in high school, my senior year, gave me a copy of The Prophet for like a graduation gift when I was
Mm-hmm.
graduating high school, and that was 2002. Um, and So she was my art teacher, who was Mrs. Whiteford at the time. She's married now. It's Mrs. Adams, but she was really instrumental in me pursuing a career in art. I wasn't really thinking about it too much throughout high school. I wasn't certainly thinking of it as any kind of career that I could pursue. I've been drawing since as long as I can remember, but wasn't something I thought seriously about. And so she kind of got me on the path. And so she was a huge, huge inspiration and influence to me. So that was 2002. She gave me the book, and then obviously we started this in what 2021, I believe
Yeah.
2022
Yep.
in earnest. So we finished it, published in 2023, 100 years after the original, and Mrs. Whiteford, now Mrs. Adams, retired from teaching that year, and I was able to give her one of my copies for her retirement party. So it was neat how it came full circle. A gift that she had given to me during my graduation, and then a gift I could give to her for her retirement. So it was really special. Something I could do. But yeah, so a long time.
Why do you think she chose specifically the Prophet for you? What do you feel like it was already a favorite of hers and she was happy to share it with all her students? Do you think there was something specific either about the story or about the wisdom in it that she wanted you to hear? What do you think was the thinking there?
That's a good question. And I should have asked her because I still am in contact with her. I actually just saw her this past weekend. She had an art show at a gallery. Now that she's retired, she has more time to do her own. art. But I should ask her. So I'd just be taking a guess. Um, but I don't know. I don't know that it's something that she's given to all her students. I think we had a pretty close relationship. She got to know me pretty well, and I was in the art room every minute that I could get. I would ditch classes and hang out in the art room and work on my projects whenever I could. And sometimes I could convince her to write a note for me, excusing me. So we developed a bond, definitely. And like I said, she was very instrumental in me getting um, into like an art college
Hmm.
to pursue the career, getting a scholarship from my district, which is pretty much the only way I could afford to go to art college. So I think it was, I don't want to say it was something that she gave every student, and I don't know if it was a book that she gave to students that she had that relationship with, but she did get to know me, and she was joking just the other day when I saw her about spirit animals and how she tried to show the students in class one day what spirit animals they were, and my first one that came up was a butterfly, and I wasn't happy with that. And so the next one that came up was a turtle, and I wasn't happy with that either. And so she was telling my wife, he finally just got fed up and said, I'm just going to draw a mountain lion. Um, and that's just who I was. I was kind of defiant and wanted to do whatever I wanted. And I think she was aware of a lot of the wisdom that was in the book, and that um, would probably help me in the long run, just in life. And yeah, so
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah. And that wasn't to suggest it definitely sounds like you had a special relationship. I was just wondering if you knew any prehistory about the book and her life, or if she said, Justin, Gibran, these two go together. Okay. I'm looking at the next set of questions. Okay, let's go to this one. This is from my student Erin. Erin asks, what was the hardest part when it came to creating the characters? Now, let's differentiate here. I actually had another student, Abby, asking specifically about the characters of Al Mustafa and Al Mitra. They're the only named characters in the whole poem. Um, and we speculated a little bit, I think, about whether they had any semi-autobiographical um, influence by Gibran himself when writing the poem. So can we start first with Abby's question specifically about Al Mustafa and Al Mitra? Did you take any biographical influence in designing the two of them, and then we can extend that to the rest of the unnamed, but certainly very idiosyncratic and very detailed rest of the cast.
um, as far as Al Mustafa and Al Mitra, I wasn't necessarily basing him off of Gibran. There were other characters who I definitely did. Um, Not to skip ahead to the next question about the other characters, but the the character, the poet, in the story, I did base him roughly off of Gibran and his
Yeah.
his likeness. But as far as Al Mustafa, I think I was just when I was designing the character, just trying to come up with a face that was unique and that was going to be a standout from a lot of the other characters. Something that was strong, a strong image, and so yeah, I finally settled on a lot of different. I was looking more at actors, I think,
Hmm.
and I can't remember a lot of the actors' names um, for sort of his look, his beard, and his face. So yeah, I wouldn't say I based him really off of Al Mustafa and Al Mitra. I was going for. I remember you saying that. the character herself would probably be, I believe you said around 40s,
Yeah, probably.
early 40s.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted her to be um, beautiful, but I think I remember explaining to you and Kendra when I was coming up with some of the sketches that it wasn't a character that was supposed to be, like a uh, like a sex symbol. It wasn't. She's not supposed to be regarded in that way. I don't think. But I did want her to be beautiful in her own way, and
Hmm.
so I just made her character and her face attractive. But and as far as all the characters, I think I based them all mostly on the geographic region that we kind of settled on, where we would take a lot of inspiration from, being the Mediterranean region, the Middle East, North Africa, some of those islands like Malta or Sicily, that general area. So just going along with a lot of features of people that live in that geographic region, I think more than basing them off of um, Al Mustafa or anybody else.
When you're designing characters for any project, including the Prophet, do you cast actors? Do you try to find a particular look or personality to base a character on, or do you try to, or do you take a totally different approach? Was this something that was unique for this project?
Uh, I do tend to look at actors, I think, or characters that I kind of um, base in my mind when I'm either reading a script or writing a character for my own comics. I do tend to think of either how that voice sounds or an actor that I think
Hmm.
um, that I kind of base them on. So yeah, I do tend to think of actors or at least characters that they play when I'm designing this person, their face or their features. So yeah, I do tend to do that.
And since we have, even though they're not named and don't actually have any speaking lines, we have a very large population for Orphalese, and we have a lot of different identified roles. You mentioned the poet. We also have the priest and priestesses. We have a family. We have a farmer. We have a shopkeeper. Was the process of designing them any different from the two main speaking characters?
Um, I mean, I definitely spent more time designing Al-Mustafa and Al-Mitra because they were the main characters,
Yeah.
so to speak. But uh, and I didn't for a lot of those characters, I didn't necessarily find actors or real life people. I think a lot of those characters were more trial and error in my sketchbook, um, just coming up with unique faces because there are so many characters. I didn't want somebody to see one character on one page and then different character on another and say, "Hey, is that the same character? Are these two different people?" I wanted them to be very unique and easy for the reader to tell them apart. So I think I spent a little more time um, just in my sketchbook coming up with different kinds of faces and features for them as opposed to finding actors to base them off of.
And that's got to be a challenge because, particularly with this project and these characters, many of them are based on their professions and their roles. So, in as much as you want them to be identifiable, you also don't want to resort to absolute stereotypes
Right.
or caricature. So that must be a really delicate balance between making them distinct, making them sort of allude to a profession, but not doing away with their whole humanity and just making them look like whatever we would think a banker looks like, or whatever we would think a shopkeeper looks like. So that has to be a delicate work.
Yeah, it was. I was trying to avoid those kinds of stereotypes,
Hmm.
but I know we did discuss a lot of it will be in the costumes or clothing that they're wearing.
Hmm.
The priests and priestesses will be in a certain type of garment or robe. You know, the mason will have his tool belt, and
Yes.
so yeah, I did. I was able to lean on that a little bit as far as differentiating who these characters were.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough to not go into stereotypes when it comes to developing characters.
Now, another of my students, Sophia, took this even further. So we go from Almitra and Mustafa, we go to the wider cast of Orphalese characters. Sophia actually wants to know what was on your mind and where was it in the creative process in creating this whole fictional world. Orphalese doesn't exist, and we had to figure out an approximate time frame for it, an approximate geography. Can you reach back into what that process was like and where we landed, where we did?
Yeah, just knowing that Kahlil Gibran was originally from Lebanon,
Hmm.
I think just using that geographic area as sort of a guidepost in creating the architecture, the style of clothing, the characters. Um, I was kind of always picturing that area, and as far as the style of clothing and the era, I think we kind of also wanted to avoid any kind of anything that was past the date of the original publication
Right,
of
past 23.
1923,
Yeah.
but sort of just a approximation of that time area. I think anywhere around the turn of the century up into 1920s, I think we kind of agreed on would be best.
Yeah, I think the
Um,
most technologically advanced product that we have is a newspaper.
mhm,
Just
yeah,
thinking about it, I know we don't have, I'm not sure we even feature a radio, which they would have had by 23, but maybe not a wireless. Um, but yeah, I think now that you're saying it, I think we tried to honor the 100th anniversary by not jumping too far out of Gibran's own circumstances.
yeah. And I remember for a lot of the costumes, I was looking at more turn of the century than even the 1920s because I was going back even further usually than um, World War II or World War One
Right.
military uniforms for some of those scenes where Al Mustafa is in battle. I was looking at some World War One, but also even back as far as I think like some battles in the Prussian wars or something like that. Um, early 20th century to late 19th century battles in Europe, and so yeah, I was definitely keeping it as early as I could.
Mhm. And I should probably note for anyone that's not immediately familiar with our adaptation here, we did try to explore or eke out a backstory for Al Mustafa. So when you refer to his military service, I think there's a lot in the poem that suggests this guy has had quite a life, has built years of wisdom, knows love and loss and tyranny and war.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's never explicitly said, "Hi there, I was a soldier once." We had to sort of interpret that ourselves. So I just didn't want anyone saying, "Where was that in the poem?" I don't
Yeah.
remember him talking about his war years in the trenches. It's very much in between the lines, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So here's another question from Jonita in my class. She asked, was your perspective on the prophet influenced by a similar source in this adaptation? And I think what Janita might be trying to get at is, were there any other adaptations, not necessarily a poem to comics specifically, but were there any other creative products out there that you were drawn to, that you had in mind, particularly with the weirdness of our task, with the weirdness of taking a pre-existing property in one medium and still doing right by it, but also exploring it in this other medium?
Um, I wasn't really looking at other adaptations as far as comics go. I haven't read a whole lot of adaptations comics in the first place. My wife did give me a comics adaptation recently. It was for Christmas for Slaughterhouse 5,
Oh,
which
sure. Kurt
I've always
Vonnegut.
loved the book. I love pretty much every Vonnegut story and book I've ever read.
Don't say
And
that,
so
dude. I'm a
seeing
huge fan also, and we're gonna have to do something if you say that. Okay.
so it was cool seeing that adaptation. But I haven't seen many. So I wasn't necessarily looking at others um, as like a guiding force or inspiration.
Mhm.
Um, Whenever I'm doing comics, I think I have comic um, idols that I look up to that I always steal from or am really influenced by. So I think it was probably more that than any kind of other adaptation. But yeah, I was definitely wary because people are very protective of originals that they've grown up with and loved. So when somebody tries to adapt it, it can be off-putting for a lot of people, and they get almost take it personally, like, how dare you take this something that I've loved my whole life and try and change it or make it something new or different because it's been around so long and people know it as one thing. So adapting it is it's tough, and I think we were both aware of that we needed to be very careful with it.
Yeah, I mean, when we were doing research on this, we discovered that there had been an attempt to do it as a movie. There had been a number of recorded orations of it, of a number of, spoken performances. So we're not the first, certainly, to try to express this in another medium, but we're among the first to do this in comics form. Um, One thing that you said a moment ago, are there any instances of adaptation, again, any medium, that um, truly did not work for you? Truly, it stands out as that did not come together properly, or they bastardized the material. I know we were very concerned, very delicate, and tried to be respectful as best we can of the original source. Does any come to mind of it going so wrong?
Um, like I said, I haven't seen many comic adaptations.
Right.
Um, but as far as taking an original and making it something new, I feel pretty strongly usually for song covers. When
Oh,
somebody tries
sure.
to cover a song, um, that see, I feel like a hypocrite saying, "Oh, we made an adaptation of a or a beloved book, and so you can't make an adaptation of a beloved song." But yeah, a lot of times when somebody tries to cover a song, it just I don't know. I find it hard to really to give it its due. For whatever reason, I get pretty protective of songs that I love. And sometimes there are good covers. There are plenty, but
Oh, of course.
yeah, as
But
a, as
that's
a
all.
rule, yeah, it's tough.
I think one thing you're hitting upon there is that while we're looking at, both my class is looking at, and you and I attempted to move really from one medium to another medium. I mean, Gibran's poem is, of course, a published text and comics. We did it as a published book also. So, I mean, you could make some argument that we're operating in the same format, but when you have a musician take another musician's musical work. Um, and maybe just cross genres with it, but not cross actual execution formats. There's a lot that can go wrong. There's
Yeah.
definitely,
Yeah, definitely.
it can be messy. I do, one thing I brought up in the class is that I don't know that this gave us permission necessarily or license. I don't know quite what the right word is, but knowing that Gibran was also a visual artist, in addition to being a writer and a poet, did feel like this wasn't taking it terribly or totally outside. It wasn't exiling it from its original creative source. And do I remember correctly? You looked at a number of Gibran's own artwork and tried to incorporate it into certain panels and pages?
Yeah, there were, and that's another thing that I think we wanted to avoid. You specifically, when you're looking at artists, I think you mentioned that you didn't want an artist who was just going to mimic or ape the drawing style that he has in his original illustrations for the Prophet. And so I think that was a wise choice to
Yeah.
avoid that. And there were, yeah, some Easter eggs in the book of a few different um, panels that do um, replicate some of the drawings, at least the poses of the figures in the drawings in yeah, in a few spots in the book. I think there's
My
three that I can
copy,
think of.
my working on my, this is all marked up and ridiculous. But my copy has this hand and eye on the cover. And if I'm not mistaken, I think on the opening page here, you're trying to allude to that through the spyglass. Is that showing up? There we
Yep, yep, that was one of them. Yeah.
So again, I don't think you're copying the style, but I think you're doing a nice acknowledgement of the originator, the Gibran as the creator here, was visually minded,
Mhm.
and could well maybe would have given his blessing to this. Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, one hopes. Yeah.
One hopes, exactly. Um, so I saved this one for last because I think this goes even larger than just the project we worked on. I had another one of my students just wanting to know, having been exposed to your artwork through this book, who or what is your biggest muse or influence just in art, in your whole creative process?
um, that's almost impossible to answer.
Sure.
I have,
Which is why I have to ask.
yeah, that's a good last question, I guess. Um, I have so many different influences visually. I mean, I get inspired by music. I get inspired by cartoons, films. As far as visual artists, there are probably hundreds of them that I'm probably even subconsciously inspired by. As far as I can narrow it down to this project,
Yeah,
probably
sure.
would be a little easier. I think with my comics and a lot of my comics, not just this particular book. Um, but Will Eisner was um, he's who the Eisner Awards are named after.
Yes.
And he did a comic back in the 40s called The Spirit. And he's done a million short stories and comic graphic novels. He was kind of the inventor of the graphic novel.
He popularized the
Like
term.
God.
Certainly, it was the first one. His contract with God was the first one to have it actually labeled a graphic novel right on the cover.
Yeah, yeah. And his faces, his way of depicting body language and facial expressions has been since the spirit has been miles above a lot of comic artists' ability to convey emotion and feeling and thought. So he's still is a huge inspiration in all of my comic work.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just so many to name. I mean, it would be impossible. But he's always one that I mention because he's one of the biggest as far as comics.
Certainly a worthwhile one. And in fact, I turned the question around on myself in my head when asking what's an adaptation that just blew it? When they actually tried to make a movie out of the spirit, when they
Oh,
tried
I never
to,
even saw it. Yeah.
it did not click. It lost the magic of the comics that you're citing right there. It sort of it definitely mangled it. So I've encountered a number of instances where well-meaning creators just can't cross the threshold from what they want and what they are inspired by into a whole new medium.
Yeah.
I hope we did it okay.
I know, I hope so. Yeah, I haven't seen the Spirit movie. I have been curious, just because, but there's always that hesitation, like, oh, is it just gonna it's just gonna ruin it? Yeah, I mean, it couldn't possibly ruin the Spirit or anything that Will Eisner's done for me, but yeah, so I do get curious, but I usually that was something that I kind of assumed would just not hit the notes right. So
Some things should not be touched. Well, um, I do want to say in closing tonight, I am very pleased and I have great memories of working on this project with you. I'm so glad to share it with my students and with any other readers out there. Maybe we'll get to team up again at some point.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was my first work in comics, um, and I'm talking like I work in comics and have worked in comics my whole life. I've been a lover of comics my whole life. I've loved comics since I was old enough to pick up a newspaper, a comic book, and I've been an illustrator, a commercial illustrator for nearly 20 years. But this was my first work in comics, and so it was sort of a dream come true, and yeah, it was great fun and a really great collaboration. Something that I really enjoyed a lot.
Well, I'm quite biased here, but I think you hit it out of the park. I thought it was terrific. I couldn't have been happier with how it all worked out.
I appreciate that.
Justin, my friend, good talking with you. I'm so happy to share this with my students and continued success with all the rest of your works.
Thank you, and I appreciate the questions from the students. And yeah, thank you for the invitation. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Take care.
All right, you too.